Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. I still remember the day Sarah said she had to work late, again. It wasn't out of the ordinary. She was a rising star at her law firm, always juggling court dates and case files. Her ambition was one of the things I loved about her. But that night, something about her tone felt off. A hesitation lingered in her voice, and when she kissed me goodbye, her smile seemed painted on, not the warm, familiar curve I had known for over a decade. "Don't wait up," she said casually, slinging her leather briefcase over her shoulder. She stepped into the brisk evening, leaving the faintest hint of her perfume in the air. I didn't press her. What kind of husband would I be if I did? But as the door clicked shut, I couldn't shake the unease that crawled up my spine. That evening was a blur of half-watched TV and restless pacing. Around midnight, I tried texting her. "How's work? Need me to save you some dinner?" The message went unread for nearly an hour before a reply finally appeared. "Sorry, swamped. Heading home soon. Love you." It was enough to quiet the whispering doubts in my head, at least for a while. The first real clue came a week later. It was a quiet Thursday evening. Sarah was upstairs, getting ready for bed. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me, the glow lighting up the room. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. "Tony from work, last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." The world stopped. Tony from work. I couldn't recall her mentioning him. My stomach twisted as the words etched themselves into my brain. I debated grabbing the phone, scrolling through her messages, demanding an explanation. But instead, I sat there frozen, trying to convince myself I'd misread it, that there was some innocent explanation. When she returned to the room, smiling and carefree, I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Confronting her without knowing the full story felt reckless. I had to be sure. The days that followed were torture. Every time Sarah left the house, I fought the urge to follow her, to confirm my suspicions. She seemed normal, almost too normal, kissing me goodbye, chatting about her day, laughing at our inside jokes. But I noticed the little things, how she guarded her phone more closely, how she started working late more often, how she seemed more distant even when she was home. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Late one night, after she'd fallen asleep, I took her phone and tried to unlock it. The code was wrong. My heart sank. Sarah had never changed her passcode before. She was hiding something. I decided to hire a private investigator. It felt extreme, almost paranoid, but I needed the truth. The investigator, a no-nonsense man named Daniel, promised to be discreet. "We'll start with her work trips," he said. "If there's anything to find, I'll find it." The waiting was unbearable. Every time Sarah left for a late meeting or a weekend conference, I felt a mixture of dread and anger bubbling inside me. I busied myself with work, with friends, with anything that could distract me, but my mind always drifted back to her. Was she lying to my face? Was our life together a sham? 2 weeks later, Daniel called. "You'll want to see this," he said. When I arrived at his office, he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photos, timestamps, and receipts. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Sarah wasn't at work conferences. She was at upscale restaurants, cozy bars, and boutique hotels, always with the same man. A man I now recognized from her phone, Tony from work. That evening, I sat in the living room, staring at the folder. My anger simmered, but so did something else, heartbreak. For years, I'd thought we had a perfect life. Sure, there were rough patches, what marriage doesn't have them? But I'd never doubted her love for me. Until now. I didn't confront her right away. I needed to plan my next move carefully. If I stormed in with accusations, she'd lie or twist the story. I wanted her to have no escape, no room for denial. That weekend, I told Sarah I'd planned a surprise dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant, the same place I proposed to her 12 years ago. Her eyes lit up. "That's so sweet, babe," she said, leaning in to kiss me. For a moment, I almost believed everything was fine. But as we sat at our candlelit table that night, sipping wine and reminiscing, the weight of the folder in my briefcase reminded me why we were really there. The Italian restaurant buzzed with life that evening. Couples whispered sweet nothings across candlelit tables, and the air was filled with the soft murmur of conversations and the occasional clink of wine glasses. I had chosen this place deliberately, a setting steeped in nostalgia. The very booth where I'd slipped a diamond ring onto Sarah's finger so many years ago. But tonight, the romantic warmth of the space felt like a cruel mockery. Sarah sat across from me, a soft smile playing on her lips. She wore the same green dress she had the night I proposed, a touch I might have found endearing if I didn't already know the truth. She twirled a strand of her dark hair absently as she spoke about her day, oblivious to the storm brewing on my side of the table. "You've been quiet," she said, tilting her head. "Everything okay?" I smiled tightly, forcing the tension in my chest to stay hidden. "Just tired. Work's been intense lately." Her eyes softened with sympathy. "You're always working so hard. We should take a weekend away soon, just the two of us." The irony of her suggestion almost made me laugh. "That's a great idea," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "We could use the time." The waiter arrived with our entrees, placing Sarah's plate of chicken piccata before her. As he set down my lasagna, I caught a glimpse of the manila folder tucked discreetly in my briefcase, resting on the bench beside me. The weight of its contents pressed on me like a stone. Halfway through the meal, I decided it was time. "You know," I began, setting down my fork, "this place brings back memories." Her smile brightened. "It really does. Our first big date, your proposal. I still can't believe you did it in front of everyone." I chuckled, though the sound felt hollow. "Yeah, it was a bold move." I paused, locking eyes with her. "But tonight, I wanted to talk about something else." Her smile faltered. "What is it?" I reached for the briefcase, pulling out the folder and laying it on the table between us. Her eyes flicked to it, curiosity turning to confusion as she noticed the label scrawled across the front, "Proof." "What's that?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Open it," I said evenly. Her hand hesitated before she flipped open the folder. The moment her eyes landed on the photos, her face paled. She sifted through the evidence, pictures of her and Tony from work at intimate dinners, holding hands outside a boutique hotel, a grainy shot of them kissing in a parked car. Receipts followed, each one stamped with dates and locations that directly contradicted her so-called work trips. Her mouth opened and closed as if searching for words, but none came. "I thought it was strange when you started changing your passwords," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Then there were the late nights, the new clothes, the guarded phone. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, but, well, the truth has a way of coming out." "James," she finally whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, leaning back in my seat. "Because I'd love to hear how dinners at five-star restaurants and weekend getaways with Tony are part of your job description." She winced, her hand trembling as she placed the folder back on the table. "It's not what you think." "Really? Then what is it, Sarah? Enlighten me." She hesitated, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might try to spin another lie. But instead, she let out a shuddering breath. It just happened. I didn't plan for this. I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "So sneaking around, lying to my face, making me believe everything was fine, none of that was intentional?" "It was a mistake," she pleaded. "I was lonely, James. You've been so busy with work." We've been drifting apart, and Tony, he made me feel noticed. Her words sliced through me. Do you have any idea how many late nights I've worked to make our life comfortable? To give you everything you've ever wanted? And this is how you repay me? She reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. I love you, James. I do. Tony, it didn't mean anything. It was stupid, and it's over. Please, we can fix this. Fix this? I laughed bitterly. You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and you think we can just sweep it under the rug. Please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I'll do anything to make it right. Just give me a chance. The waiter approached, his face a mask of concern. Is everything all right here? I nodded curtly. We're fine. Just the check, please. He retreated, and I turned back to Sarah. Here's the thing. I don't trust you anymore. And without trust, what do we have? We have 12 years of marriage, she said desperately. We have history, a life together. Don't throw it all away because of one stupid mistake. You threw it away the moment you let him into your life, I snapped. This wasn't a mistake, Sarah. It was a choice. A series of them. Her sobs grew louder, and I felt the eyes of nearby diners on us. I didn't care. I had spent weeks swallowing my anger, my heartbreak. Tonight, it was her turn to feel the weight of it. I'll pack my things tomorrow, I said, rising from the table. You can keep the house. I'll stay somewhere else. James, wait. No, I cut her off. You don't get to ask me for anything anymore. As I drove home alone, the city lights blurred through my windshield. The anger in me burned hot, but beneath it, I felt the ache of loss. I'd built my world around Sarah, trusted her with everything. Now, that world was in ruins. And yet, as I parked the car in the driveway and stared at the darkened house, one thought lingered in my mind: I wasn't done. Not yet. She hadn't just betrayed me, she betrayed our vows, our life. If she thought she'd seen the full extent of my rage, she was sorely mistaken. The house felt eerily quiet when I returned. Sarah had beaten me home, her car parked neatly in the driveway, but the lights inside were dim. I hesitated before stepping through the door, bracing myself for whatever emotional scene awaited me. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch with a tissue crumpled in her hand. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup streaked from the tears. She looked up at me, but I walked past her, heading straight for the stairs. James, please, she called after me. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I felt the faintest twinge of pity. We need to talk. We already talked, I said without turning around. Now I need to pack. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, determined not to let her see how close I was to breaking. My emotions swung wildly between anger and grief, each one threatening to consume me. Upstairs, I threw open the closet and began pulling my clothes off the hangers, tossing them into an open suitcase on the bed. Sarah appeared in the doorway moments later, her frame small and hesitant. You don't have to leave, she said softly. We can figure this out. I didn't look at her. There's nothing to figure out, Sarah. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I made a mistake, she cried, stepping into the room. I was stupid and selfish, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. Us. I finally turned to face her, my voice sharp. What part of us were you thinking about when you were with him? Was it when you lied about where you were? Or when you let him touch you? Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I love you, James. I never stopped loving you. Don't you dare use that word, I spat. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't lie and cheat and destroy everything in its path. She sank to the edge of the bed, her shoulders trembling. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did, I said. You didn't think about me at all, Sarah. You didn't think about how this would shatter me, how it would ruin everything we built together. I was lonely, she whispered. You've been so distant, always working late, always stressed. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to you anymore. I laughed bitterly. So your solution was to run to Tony? To have an affair? Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to provide for us? Everything I've done was for you, for this life. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I don't deserve forgiveness, she said. But I'm asking for it anyway. Please, James. Don't walk away. Her plea hung in the air, but I couldn't find it in me to answer. Instead, I returned to packing, letting the sound of zippers and rustling fabric fill the silence. Eventually, she left the room, her quiet sobs trailing behind her. I stayed at a hotel that night, the sterile room offering none of the comfort of home. I lay awake in the stiff bed, staring at the ceiling as the events of the evening replayed in my mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, the wreckage of a life I thought was secure. The anger still burned, but beneath it was a hollow ache that refused to let me sleep. By morning, I had made a decision. Leaving wasn't enough. Sarah had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, and I couldn't let her walk away unscathed. She had destroyed my trust, my faith in her, and I would make sure she felt the weight of that destruction. The next day, I reached out to Daniel, the private investigator. I asked him to dig deeper, not just into Sarah's relationship with Tony, but into every aspect of her life. I want to know everything, I told him. Her finances, her work, her secrets. Leave no stone unturned. It didn't take long for Daniel to uncover more. Sarah's affair with Tony wasn't her first indiscretion. There had been others, brief flings that didn't last but spoke volumes about her character. There were also discrepancies in her finances, including a hidden bank account she had been using to funnel money for personal trips and gifts. Each revelation felt like a fresh wound, but it also fueled my resolve. If Sarah wanted to play games, I would beat her at them. I began crafting my revenge carefully, methodically. The first step was informing Tony's wife. It wasn't hard to find her, social media made it easy. I sent her an anonymous message, attaching the evidence Daniel had collected. Within hours, she responded, her shock and heartbreak evident in her words. I knew exactly how she felt. Next, I turned my attention to Sarah's job. Her firm had a strict code of conduct, one that explicitly forbade relationships with clients or coworkers that could create conflicts of interest. I sent a package of evidence to her HR department, making sure they couldn't ignore the breach. A week later, Sarah was called into a meeting and terminated on the spot. Her humiliation didn't end there. I made sure word of her affair spread quietly but effectively through our social circles. Friends who once admired her began to distance themselves, their whispers of judgment trailing her wherever she went. The final blow came when I filed for divorce. I had the papers drawn up quickly, citing infidelity and detailing every instance of her betrayal. Sarah begged me to reconsider, her tearful apologies falling on deaf ears. I refused to let her drag me down any further. When the divorce was finalized, I walked away with a clear conscience and a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had so carelessly destroyed. But even as I stood on the other side of the wreckage, a new question loomed: what came next? I had spent so much time focused on vengeance that I hadn't thought about the future. As the anger began to fade, I realized I had an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, to start fresh. And this time, I would build something unshakable. Something real. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The house I had once shared with Sarah was sold, and I moved into a small but comfortable apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a place where her memories couldn't seep into every corner. Revenge had brought its own strange satisfaction. Sarah had lost her job, her reputation, and the life we had built together. Tony's wife had filed for divorce as well, and I heard through the grapevine that he'd left town, his name sullied in both his personal and professional circles. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt empty. Evenings were the hardest. The silence of my new home pressed down on me, making me yearn for the sound of her laugh, her footsteps on the stairs. Some nights, I almost reached for my phone to call her, to hear her voice again. But I stopped myself every time. That chapter of my life was closed. One dreary evening, as rain drummed against the windows, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling on a trip to the Grand Canyon, laughing at a family barbecue, celebrating our 10th anniversary with champagne and fireworks. I had once thought those moments were the foundation of something unbreakable. Now, they felt like relics of a life that had been a lie. As I swiped through the photos, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize lit up the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello." There was a long pause on the other end before a familiar voice broke through. "James." It was Sarah. Her voice was strained, almost unrecognizable. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "I need to see you," she said, her voice trembling. "Please." "I don't think that's a good idea." "James, it's important. It's about everything." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Curiosity and something deeper, something I didn't want to name, pulled me in. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. Sarah looked like a shadow of her former self. Her once polished appearance was gone, replaced by hollow cheeks and tired eyes. She clutched a steaming cup of coffee as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, not meeting my gaze. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. "I know I'm the last person you want to see. And I don't blame you. But I had to tell you the truth." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I think I've heard enough of your truths." "This is different," she said, her voice breaking. "It's about why I did what I did." My patience was wearing thin. "You already told me. You were lonely, you felt invisible, Tony made you feel noticed. Spare me the speech." "No, James," she said, her eyes finally locking onto mine. "It's not that simple. There's something I never told you. Something I couldn't tell you." I frowned, a knot tightening in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. About a year before everything fell apart, I started feeling off. I was tired all the time, couldn't focus. I thought it was just stress, but when I finally went to the doctor, they found something. My heart pounded. "Found what?" "Cancer," she said, the word hanging in the air like a death knell. "Stage 4. It had already spread by the time they caught it." The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "You're lying," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I was," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, James. Scared of what it would mean for us, for you. So I threw myself into distractions, work, Tony, anything to avoid facing the truth." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "You're telling me you cheated on me because you were dying?" She flinched at the harshness of my words but didn't deny it. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I know it doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing does. But I couldn't stand the thought of you watching me waste away." "Sarah," my voice broke, and I looked away, unable to process the avalanche of emotions crashing over me. "I'm not telling you this to get your pity," she said. "I don't deserve that. I just needed you to know. To understand. I sat in silence, my hands trembling. Anger, sadness, and a strange sense of guilt churned inside me. Had I been so focused on my own pain that I'd missed hers? Had my vengeance blinded me to the reality of her suffering? Why now? I asked finally. Why tell me this now? Because I don't have much time left, she said softly. And I didn't want to leave this world with you hating me. We sat there for hours, talking about everything, her diagnosis, her regrets, the life we had built and lost. By the time I left, the rain had stopped, but the world felt heavier than ever. Sarah passed away 3 months later. I was there, holding her hand as she took her last breath. Despite everything, I couldn't abandon her in the end. Love, even when betrayed, has a way of enduring. Her death left me hollow, the vengeance I'd once sought now feeling petty and meaningless. In the end, we were both victims, of her choices, of my anger, and of a cruel twist of fate. Some wounds never heal. Some truths leave scars too deep to ignore. But as I stood at her grave, I whispered the words I couldn't say when she was alive, I forgive you.